Hi everyone, Matt here from Proof Fly Fishing. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to fix a rod section that has become delaminated. Now, how you can tell, I've got a section here, and this one's pretty bad. You can hear that. I'm just being very careful, but I'm flexing it, and it's just kind of cracking a little bit. You can hear it, the pieces rubbing against each other. And actually, if I get in there, this one is so bad, I can actually lift. You can see that line right there. That's the individual piece of bamboo pulling away from some of the other ones. And this is a tip section. This one is about as bad as I've ever seen. So we've got the ferrule down here. The actual area that's not glued, or that the glue has dried out, or who knows what happened to it, is probably 1.5 inches up from that ferrule and goes for about 3 inches, and then it stops. So the first thing I've done is I've removed the guides above and below the area that's obviously has a problem. And the reason I do that is because sometimes these guides can hide a problem that's underneath. And so I pull those off so that I can see exactly how far the area goes without those guides kind of interfering. And I do the same with the finish. So I'll usually remove the finish because even that thin layer of varnish can kind of keep those rod sections together when internally there might be a problem. So to fix it, what we're going to do is we're going to inject glue onto the inside of that blank. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a syringe with a needle on it. We carry these on the site, and we're going to use, let's turn it the right way, Titebond 3 wood glue. You can get that at pretty much any hardware store, and it's great. It's waterproof. It has a nice long working time. Modern bamboo rod builders will actually use Titebond 3 to assemble, the individual pieces of bamboo, and it does a really nice job. So we're going to do that. One thing we're going to be dealing with very small areas. So the better we can get that glue to flow, the easier it's going to be to get it where we need it to be. So you can't really thin this wood glue effectively. It weakens the bond. So what I usually do is I take my syringe with the wood glue in it, and I put it in a glass of warm water, and that heat helps it soften up a little bit and helps it kind of move around a little bit easier. The other thing before we get started here, I'm going to show you one more thing that we're going to have on hand, and that is, when you build a bamboo rod, once you have the individual pieces glued up, you bind them together with string, and that string clamps the area while that glue dries, and it holds all the pieces together. The traditional thread that they're using is going to be a glazed or a bonded cotton. It comes off nice once the glue is dry. We carry it on the site if you want to pick up a piece. We carry it along with these syringes with a needle tip. So what we're going to do is, to get this thread ready, I usually get about a 4-foot piece, which is probably longer than I need, but you certainly don't want to run out when you have glue that's drying. And I take one end and I just tie a very simple overhand knot, and I'll show you how that works and what we're going to do with that in just a minute. This is I think I mentioned this is a tip section, so we're dealing with a very small area, very delicate cane, and so we're going to be extremely careful. If you're working on a butt section or a mid section of a rod and you're having this issue, sometimes you can take toothpicks and you can actually work them into the problem area to kind of open those cracks up a little bit. This one's so bad I can actually do it on this. But you can see what that toothpick is doing is it's just holding it open so that in a minute I can take my syringe and I can actually get in there to get as much glue in there as possible. When it comes to the amount of glue you want to use, don't be shy. We can always wipe the excess glue off, but what we want to try to do is flood the inside of that blank. We want to get as much glue in there, and then we're going to actually move it around a little bit to kind of get that glue in as many places as we can. As you can see, where this crack actually closes, about right here, let's see if you can see that, about right here, it's going to be impossible to get glue in there. It's just too small of an area. So we're going to get as much as we can in the larger area, and then we're going to kind of flex the rod just a little bit in hopes of trying to work some down into that area. But the glue is only part one of how we're going to fix this. So the second phase of fixing this should address that kind of tightening up area that's too small to get glue on the inside. So let's start with our glue. We've got our syringe, and this is going to be a little tricky to show because I'm trying to get a video it. But okay, so we've got our syringe in there now, and I'm just inserting as much glue along that full length of that crack as I'm able, getting that tip in there as far as I can, and kind of trying as carefully as I can to work those rod sections open. And you can see on the other side, that's a good sign. I've pushed enough glue in that it's coming out the opposite side of the blank. And then I just get in there again from the opposite side, and again we flood that area with glue. And I think I've got one more side here that's come apart, and we've got the tip of that needle in there, and it's a little messy as you can see, but don't worry about that. So that's it. That's our section. It's a complete mess, and what I'm going to do is just kind of take my fingers and I'm going to rub that glue around, getting it in that whole area. And now while that glue is still kind of soft, I'm going to kind of flex very carefully, flex this rod, and that's going to kind of push that glue around on the inside. You can wipe this off a little bit. A little excess glue is not going to hurt anything on the outside. We'll come back later when this is dry, and we can scrape that off or use steel wool to clean it up if need be. So now we need to clamp it, and that's where our thread comes in. So to clamp it, what I do is I take the thread with the loop in it, and I'll put it just beyond the break or the damaged area on the underside with the loop facing up. And then I'll take the tag end and I'll feed it through that loop. And all we're doing is creating a very simple knot that's going to be used to kind of bind or clamp this section while it dries. So we've got it on there now. I'm going to do a couple wraps just to tighten everything up. I'll show you that in just a second. So there we are. Our thread is attached. And now I take that thread and I'm holding medium tension on it. You don't need to go crazy, but you don't want it loose. And then we're going to do a spiral. And what we're doing here is we're just clamping those sections against each other. And we're going to go beyond the actual area that we worked on. Sometimes you'll see a little glue press out like you're seeing there now. If you can see those kind of white dots, that's glue actually being lightly pressed out of the joint. We don't want to squeeze so much that we press it all out, but it doesn't take a very thick layer. So now I'm past the actual section I worked on. I do a couple extra wraps, and then I change direction and I come back over top of the area I just did. We're just doing that cross wrap to make sure everything's nice and even. And again, that's a good sign. I'm getting a little bit of glue coming through, which I like to see. It means I got plenty of glue in there. And I get to the ferrule, and I'm just going to do a few wraps. You can do an overhand knot here. I've got a piece of tape here that I'm just going to use to kind of hold that tag end while it dries. So there's kind of the finished product of how that looks once we have the glue in, and now it's clamped. So I'm going to take this rod section and I'm just going to lean it up against a wall. I'm going to give it a good 24 hours. And in just a minute we'll be back and I'll show you how to take that thread off and how to clean up that area. And then we're going to move into the second phase of this repair, which is to strengthen the area from the outside. So yeah, stay tuned, we'll be right back and we'll show you how that works. Thanks. Hey everyone, we're back. It's been at least 24 hours since we applied the glue and the clamp to this rod section that we repaired. And I just want to take you through the next few steps to finish up this repair. First thing is we're going to remove the thread, and depending on how much excess glue you had on the outside of that rod, it can come off very easy, or it can come off with a little more work. But basically you're just, pulling that thread off in the opposite direction that you put it on. This one's coming off pretty easy. Other times I've had it where, you're kind of have to get real close to the blank and lift those sections a little more careful. But this one came off pretty simple. So what you'll notice then is that you have this very rough glue residue on the top of that blank still. So we're just going to use our cabinet scraper from before, and there's nothing really technical about this. We're just going to scrape that off. Again, like before, we're going to focus on the flats, and when each flat is smooth, then we move to the next one. We want to avoid kind of rounding the corners excuse me, of the blank. And when you're done, I don't have my steel wool with me at the moment, but when you're done scraping that glue off, then you can take your steel wool and polish it like before. And then your blank, it's amazing how well that glue fixes, those delaminated pieces. So I can't see any flex. When I flex the blank, that is, I cannot see any areas that are lifting. It feels solid. It feels very much like the rest of the blank. It's not like a stiff spot in the blank. So we're going to move on to the last part now, and that is just going to be reinforcing that the area that we repaired with some wraps on the outside. So give me just a second, and I'll get things set up, and I'll show you how that's done. All right, thanks. Okay, we are back, and what I've done with this blank is, you remember in the last video we used the scraper to get the glue residue off, and then we took the steel wool to smooth everything out. The next step is going to be to finish or seal the blank, and we showed that in a couple earlier videos. I finished this one just like the earlier rod, and I used True Oil. I think I did 3 coats, and then I lightly sanded it. I did 2 coats, and then I polished it out with rotten stone. And so the blank is finished. It's ready to accept guides. But before we do the guides, what I wanted to do, let me see if I can focus this a little bit better on what's going on here. Before we go ahead and wrap the guides on, we're going to reinforce the area of the repair just a little bit. And to do this, we're going to use raw silk. Now, you don't have to use raw silk if you want to use a colored silk. These are basically, I call them a version of an intermediate wrap. Intermediate wraps, you can see these on older rods where you'll have the guides, and then you'll have these small, sometimes wraps, 4 to 6 turns. Mine are a little bit wider. But they'll be spaced between the guides. Sometimes you'll have them every, ½ inch for the full length of the rod. And the original purpose of those was back when they used to use hide glue to hold these rod sections together. Those wraps would literally be keeping that rod together sometimes, as that glue just didn't have the holding power that modern glues have. So our wraps are a little bit thicker. If you'll notice, they look a little bit rough. I didn't, or I generally don't, when I'm doing a repair like this, burnish them or even pack them all that well sometimes, for the simple reason that they're going to disappear when we apply varnish to them. Now, if you're doing a colored wrap, you can take a little more time and make those look a little more presentable. But these, when finished properly, you won't see it all. So totally up to you. The green tape is marking a place where a guide is going to go, which is great. If you can kind of adjust your guide spacing even a little bit when you have a repair section so that guide lands over top of the repair, that can be excellent, because now I'm going to have two probably 1/4 inch wraps, adding still more strength to this previously compromised area. And we also have the ferrule here, so we're going to have a small ferrule wrap. So we're going to have plenty of clamping power coming from the outside of this blank. I did 4 wraps, and that extended just a little bit past where the break was, or the delaminated section rather. And I made sure to put the wraps on the outside of that break, because we want to remember when we talked about gluing it, how you can't get glue to the extreme outside edges of that opening. These 2 wraps on the outside are going to help kind of keep those edges tight. Then I did 2 more, and along with the guide, we should be more than covered. So to seal everything up, I'm using varnish, and this is varnish that's been thinned probably 30 to 40% using terps. So all we're going to do is apply a small drop to that thread, and you'll see it just starts to disappear, and we'll take up any excess that we have. You'll see that thread just a little bit with the first coat, but I'm going to come back and do second and possibly a third coat, and by that point that silk will have pretty well disappeared. And same thing, if you have a little tag end that's sticking up around those, once this first coat of varnish is dry, we'll come back through and we'll smooth everything out. Just take a razor blade and you kind of shear off any of those little tag ends that might be there. Just like that. We've got one more to go. And if you do your varnish thin enough, you don't have to put this on a drying stand to rotate too long. You can kind of manually turn it. And again, I don't want any sagging on those wraps. So if I see any kind of dripping down, I'm just going to take the edge of the toothpick and wipe that excess away. You might still be able to see those a little bit, but we'll come back and we'll add additional coats. Depending on how much you thin your varnish and the temperature and humidity, sometimes you can apply a second and third coat roughly 2 hours apart if everything's dry. So that's pretty much it. It's repaired from the inside and we've supported it from the outside. Once everything is dry and we wrap our guides on, this rod section will be ready to fish. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. We also carry the syringes, the thread that we used, the glazed thread, and we use the raw, and we carry the raw silk as well on the site. For reference, that is the Kimono 374, and it works great. All right, thank you so much for watching. Bye.